all-knowing and all-powerful, starting with the elderly wolf uncle. Chapter 64. Well, so can I, he first murmured, then his tone gradually became intense. My limit is more than that. Clark's last voice was roared out in a roaring tone. The momentum on his body, accompanied by his words, climbed abruptly little by little, until the last word blurted out. Boom! Clark's body suddenly erupted in addition to extremely powerful power. All the surrounding air rippled out of thin air. His whole figure rose up even more abruptly, turning into an afterimage that ordinary people could not see clearly with the naked eye, and directly burst out at a speed beyond the speed of sound. Rushing towards Chen Tian. Chen. Clark stared at Chen Tian deadly, his eyes split. Looking at the delicate young man's face, there was only one thought left in his mind: then I will defeat you. I'm going to prove me right. I'm going to prove that I have that ability. Boom! Clark instantly flashed in front of Chen Tian, and the air behind him erupted into a burst of explosions, shaking the ground. Chen! Clark roared and slammed into Chen Tian's body, and then stretched out his hands to hold the latter and not let go. At this moment, he directly urged his power to the extreme. Rushed in one direction. Clark, are you still clinging to that unnecessary thought? Chen Tian was held by him and spoke in a deep voice. The next instant, he saw Clark's hideous expression and his mouth open to roar, but he couldn't hear what the latter was yelling. There was only a sharp explosion after breaking the sound barrier. Because at this moment, Chen Tian was held by Clark and rushed in one direction, and the speed had completely exceeded the speed of sound. Clark's position was behind Chen Tian again, and the voice could not reach Chen Tian's ears at all. At such a speed that is difficult for ordinary people to distinguish with the naked eye of 2.2, the two sides turned into a blurry afterimage, and instantly crossed the sky over the metropolis city. Disappear in the blink of an eye. Above the metropolis, the sea of golden clouds belonging to the evening was suddenly torn in half by life, rolling and lined up on both sides. A sharp sonic boom fell from above the sky dome, causing everyone to look up in confusion. Next second, a gust of wind blows and sweeps every corner of the metropolitan city. A lot of clothes that were drying outside, as well as other scattered small things, were brought into the air. Half a minute later, a vast desert where the setting sun has just touched the horizon. A poisonous snake lurking under the rocks is swallowing its tongue and staring at the lizard crawling in front of it. Swish! It suddenly burst out with terrifying speed, directly swallowing the lizard into its mouth, and its fangs pierced into the latter's body to inject venom. It didn't take long for the lizard to stop struggling and lose its life. The viper is preparing to raise its head and swallow its newly captured prey. Suddenly, it heard a sharp sonic boom high in the sky and looked up. I saw that high in the sky, the air rippled. On the desert farther away, there was a terrifying gust of wind, setting off a sandstorm, with a huge momentum, sweeping rapidly. Boom! Next second, high in the sky, two figures fell fiercely towards the desert. These two figures are Chen Tian and Clark. When they fell, they did not slow down in the slightest. Everywhere he passed, the wind was blowing, and his body was followed by a sound barrier. Seeing the ground getting closer and closer, Clark's gaze froze, and it was actually the rebirth that accelerated his speed by a few points. Rumble! The two smashed to the surface of the desert at the same time. The surface rock formations were washed away by the terrifying impact, and the gaps spread in all directions, stirring up the splash of rock fragments. Chapter 62 Ancient Doomsday. Luther's evil thoughts. Phew! In the sharp sound of breaking the air, two figures above the sky rapped in a speed beyond the speed of sound, telling the flying. At an altitude of thousands of meters, a round of sonic booms was triggered, creating a circle of ripple-like air fluctuations. The clouds of the entire sky were torn apart from the middle and stirred fiercely. Clark, you should know that things in the world will not always go as expected. Chen Tian resisted the sound barrier generated behind him, and his eyes flickered to look at the resolute face that was close at hand. He felt the fluctuating and tangled mood in the other party's heart, so he guided it out loud. After Clark heard Chen Tian's words, his eyes moved, his gaze flickered obviously, and he didn't know what to think about. Then, he frowned and accelerated. Directly improve your own speed that has already reached the extreme. Rumble! Suddenly, the two who had already told the flight that the speed of moving forward had increased to another level. Around the body, 3 white sound barriers were broken in a row. Chen Tian and Clark's figures, but in the blink of an eye, they had already arrived over New Mexico. Then when they came to a wilderness, smash hard towards the ground. The ground within a radius of several hundred meters was directly smashed and collapsed, and countless surface rocks splashed around. Boom! Suddenly, the ground around them was trembling violently, and endless dust and fog were blowing into the sky. Countless animals on the desert that would only travel at night were so frightened that they crawled out of the shadows and fled into the distance. Boom! Suddenly, in the center of the dusty and misty pit, there was a sound of a fierce collision. It was even more endlessly fierce wind, blowing out from the depths of the dust and fog with powerful power, and instantly emptied all the fluttering dust. Then, it can be seen that deep in the big pit on the ground, there are 2 figures fighting madly. Between the 2 figures, they will burst out with an extreme sense of power, and each movement will trigger the surrounding airflow to rotate, forming an extremely strong airflow. Every time the fists collide, it will create a roar that is enough to resound back and forth between heaven and earth, making the whole land tremble violently. As the two clashed, the ground on which they stood continued to collapse deeper zero, smoke and dust rose around them, and with the strong wind of the 2 fists, all were eliminated. And the cycle continued. Boom! The speed of the 2 figures staggering is getting faster and faster, the punching force is getting heavier and heavier, and the battle is getting more and more intense. At first, it can be said that it is difficult to distinguish between the 2 sides. It's just that as time passed, the remnant sun at the horizon gradually faded, and one of the figures began to fall downwind. Rumble. Another figure grabbed the gap where the other party began to make mistakes, and a powerful punch blasted out fiercely. All the surrounding air was violently pulled by his punch, forming a violent wind, and another figure that had suffered a heavy blow flew out upside down together. The figure left the ground with both feet and flew away like a broken kite into the distance, accompanied by a fierce wind and dust. Boom, boom, boom. The figure gradually fell, and after smashing a sand dune, it bounced several times on the ground one after another, smashing out several holes full of cracks before landing heavily on the ground. Am I still not as good? The figure braced himself on the ground with both hands, crawled up in embarrassment, and muttered as if he was unwilling. First chapter.